Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Every space mission involves a lot of moving parts. Few companies can provide as many of those moving parts as Redwire, which specializes in mission-critical space solutions ranging from on-orbit servicing and manufacturing to solar power generation and microgravity research. Joining me today on the Ex Terra Podcast is Mike Gold, Chief Growth Officer at Redwire. Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tom. It's a pleasure.
It's my pleasure as well. Let's start out with just kind of a brief history of Redwire. Tell us how this company came to be.
So Redwire was initiated by AE Industrial Partners, which is an equity firm with over $6 billion of capital, I believe, now under management. And the vision that the AE founders had was, on one end of the spectrum, you've got very large companies that have their place in the ecosystem, but even they would admit may not be the most flexible or adaptable, able to respond to firm fixed price, et cetera. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got some smaller companies that just have PowerPoints, some good ideas, but no real capabilities. And the concept with Redwire was to have a company that was right down the middle, that was agile, dynamic, could work on firm fixed price, but also had real heritage, real capabilities, and real systems. And that was the driving vision that I think we've accomplished here at Redwire. The company was formed via acquisition, but unlike some others in the industry, when you join Redwire, you join a whole company. That we're not a holding company, that we are a single unified entity. As a Star Trek fan, I say we're the Borg, that when you join Redwire, you get mortified, which is wonderful because it creates real synergies, real opportunities. 1 + 1 not only equals 4, but sometimes 6 or 8 with Redwire. And it's just been terrific to see some of our disparate parts come together, yet despite those differences, in many cases because of those differences, find synergies in places that we could cooperate you wouldn't have even imagined before. And it's allowed us as a company to go after some pretty ambitious projects and continue to grow. And we're not done yet. I'm in charge of growth, and it's a great place to be at Redwire because one thing we are doing is growing. We were incredibly excited for the recent acquisition of Era Systems to join the Redwire family, and I'm sure we're not done yet. So exciting times, I know, ahead for Redwire and the space industry as a whole.
What made Hera Systems kind of an attractive acquisition target for Redwire?
Yeah, so the bus opportunity that they're able to offer, it allows us to combine with some of the other products that we've got in terms of whether it's solar power, whether it's antennas, whether it's sun sensors or star trackers. It creates a platform that now we can offer holistically to move us up the supply chain a bit and be able to look at all of the different orbits, GEO, LEO, MEO, and now with Hera, we've got a nice small GEO bus that we think could fill some very important niches and capabilities for national security and numerous other customers.
Why the level of diversity, though, Mike? What most companies is sort of like Charles Emerson, Winchester, and MASH. If we're going to do our television analogies, I do one thing at a time, I do it very well, and I move on. This company seems like it is got its finger in more pots than there are pots.
Well, as someone who enjoys eating, I've got my fingers in a number of pots, and I think it's a good attitude. Maybe that's why I'm here, because I'm hungry literally and figuratively. I think diversity is key to strength. Diversity is key to sustainability. If you look at some of the struggles that other commercial space companies have, I think it's because of a lack of diversity. And Redwire has a fantastic balance and portfolio of both existing products that have predictable markets, strong markets, as well as some optionality in places where we'd like to develop that have tremendous potential. So if you look at the success of Redwire, particularly compared to some of the other companies that were SPACs or just commercial companies in general, it's because of the fact that we have our fingers in so many different places that we're a very sustainable, growing entity, because I don't need to go to amusement parks anymore. The commercial space industry in general is a roller coaster ride. And that's why it's so important to have that diversity, to have that balance, because when one area or technology goes up, another may come down. So I believe that diversity is a real strength of Redwire and why we're going to continue to grow as a company, no matter what the future holds.
So then what do you consider some of the most successful products or maybe services that Redwire offers?
Well, I think you can start with power. Everyone needs it. And like to say, second only to the sun, Redwire's providing the most power for space right now. We've had terrific success in that arena via our rollout solar arrays, which are compacted like a carpet and then roll out once they hit orbit, providing a lot more area, a lot more volume, and therefore a lot more power, while taking up a relatively small amount of rocket-faring space. Boeing was our customer for the IROSs, the International Space Station rollout solar arrays, and I'm very proud to say that those are powering the International Space Station as we speak. It's a terrific example of a technology that NASA initially developed that now is being commercialized, because the same rollout solar array technology has now been purchased by Thales for their Inspires satellites. Blue Origin is using the rollout solar arrays for their Blue Ring system. So a wonderful example of success of a technology that was developed initially for NASA, but now is supporting a number of critical private sector activities while allowing NASA to continue to push the envelope of exploration. The rollout solar arrays, much larger version of what's on the International Space Station, is being used for the Gateway. I believe that those rollout solar arrays on the Gateway's power and propulsion element, and our customer there is Maxar, and we appreciate the support, those arrays will be the largest ever deployed, we believe, by humanity in space. So absolutely gigantic arrays. We actually had to lease a new facility near Santa Barbara, California, just to be able to support these gigantic arrays. They were also used on the DART mission, the Double Asteroid Redirect Test mission. So those are the rollout solar arrays that saved humanity. So or could hopefully save humanity someday. And now we didn't get those arrays back, of course. They crashed into DART. Maybe pieces. I heard there was debris from DART that actually came back to Earth. So a fascinating mission that we were thrilled to be a part of. So just an example of the diversity of utility of these rollout solar arrays, and shows how that is a today product. That's a now product, is something we're very certain of. Power is needed now. There will be increasing demands moving ahead. And that's a good example of an anchor capability, an anchor offering that Redwire has that provides us with financial sustainability to move forward, not only in power, but many other areas into the future.
So then talk about the role of innovation and technology in driving the growth in your company.
Sure. So on the other end of the spectrum, a capability that's far less mature, but I would say just as exciting as our rollout solar arrays, is microgravity research, development, and manufacturing. I believe that the countries and companies that master microgravity manufacturing are going to be not only the economic, but the national security leaders of the future. And Redwire has unparalleled global expertise in this area. We're the only company to have 3D printed successfully on the ISS. I believe we have roughly 10 payloads now on the International Space Station, more than any other company. And we've conducted hundreds of microgravity experiments, not only on the space station, but dating back to the shuttle era.
Right.
And I think that the low-hanging fruit, the near-term industrialization that will occur is in the biotech and pharmaceutical field.
Right.
That, for example, we launched the biofabrication facility, the BFF, on the International Space Station. We're great at names. It's one area among many where Redwire excels. And the BFF, which truly is my best friend, successfully manufactured the first human meniscus in space. And subsequent to that success, we manufactured live cardiovascular tissue and for the first time ever, brought back live cardiovascular tissue from the International Space Station. And this is targeted to create heart patches to help people with heart disease. And ultimately, as we move forward with this technology, and it needs to evolve, we'll probably go to organoids first, which is very small versions of organs that you can use for drug testing and other forms of testing, replacing animal testing, which is both more ethical to replace that testing, and the testing on human organoids would be more accurate. But eventually, and this is down the road, but eventually being able to create whole organs in space.
Right.
And think about how that would revolutionize the organ donation paradigm, that we'll look back on what we're doing today, I believe, as being medieval, where we're waiting for people to die to harvest organs instead. When we can create organs in space, obviously we'll be able to serve a much larger group of people much more quickly, save numerous lives, and because these organs would be developed with your own stem cells, that we can avoid the expensive and painful anti-rejection drug therapies that are otherwise required. So this is a good example of the more optionality, the future-leaning work that we have. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention our pillbox capability. And I'm a recovering attorney. I got a B- in biology, so please bear with me as I describe microgravity biological impacts. But my understanding is that when you develop seed crystals in microgravity, you can create perfect versions of these seed crystals, which are then used to develop drugs here on Earth. So there's not a lot of volume you need. Our pillbox system, where we develop these seed crystals, is about the size of a shoebox, and it's fully automated. And you bring down just a thimbleful of these seed crystals, and then you can produce via these differentiated, improved crystals from what you could do on Earth, better versions of drugs with less side effects, better longevity. It's already been proven via work that Merck conducted on a cancer treatment called Keytruda. And we've now flown pillbox numerous times and believe that we have fully substantiated that this does occur. We know how to do it. So now it's just a matter of identifying drugs to go after that we can improve via microgravity development, and then bringing those drugs to market. So it's an extraordinarily exciting time in this area.
So then how do you balance the need for that innovation with the practicalities of growth and profitability?
It gets back to your first question, that balance and diversity is key. I believe if we solely focused on ROSAs, solely focused on the now, that we would be doing a disservice to ourselves and our investors. On the other hand, if we only focused on the tomorrow type technologies, on future leaning systems, again, that would be doing a disservice to those who are investing. And that's why the balance is key, that we need to ensure that we've got a strong, stable financial foundation via products that are demanded today, but are investing and developing and taking advantage of these incredible new developments that will occur in the future. And you ask about diversity, two are completely related, that we wouldn't want to be doing, I think, a lot of the forward-leaning work if we didn't have the stable foundation of the ROSAs. And part of the reason that we like the stable foundation is it allows us to lean forward and build for the future. So again, diversity is absolutely key.
My guest is Mike Gold, Chief Growth Officer at Redwire. Take a moment right now to click subscribe to be sure you don't miss any of our podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, any of the videos from Ex Terra, the Journal of Space Commerce. Mike, how did you get involved in the space industry? You said you're a recovering attorney. What was your journey like into this realm?
So I began as a Star Trek fan. And
live long and prosper.
Absolutely. I remember watching the original series on my black and white television. I grew up on an Indian reservation in northeastern Montana, and you could clearly see the stars, the Milky Way galaxy, in a way that was inspiring. You felt like you were in space when you looked up in big sky country and saw the stars. We moved later to Billings, Montana. I remember telling my mother, we can't leave the reservation. We have to stay here with our people. And that's when she broke it to me that I was Jewish, not Lakota Sioux. So I haven't recovered ever since. And again, it was very inspiring. Obviously, there was still, a lot of drugs, a lot of poverty on the reservation. But my mother actually works on a program called High Schools United to create hardware with NASA, where she's gone to reservations, worked with the schools to develop hardware that's now flying on the International Space Station, and helped inspire a number of students that probably weren't even thinking of graduating high school, but now went on to become engineers. So again, I've got a affinity and owe a lot to growing up on the reservation and what that meant to me. My grandfather was also involved in the Apollo missions, at least in an ancillary fashion. He tested the radio testing system back in the day. So he always had an attachment to space. And I wanted to go into it as a scientist, quantum physics, astronomer, as an engineer. But unfortunately, my math is an utter disaster, much to the chagrin of my high school math teacher mother at the time. So, just really bad. But I could certainly talk a lot, and that's how I found my way into the law. But I always wanted to involve space. And when I had an opportunity in law school for my first year internship, you do a clerkship between your first and second years of law school. I was fortunate to get an internship at NASA Langley. I actually had a choice between NASA Langley and NASA Kennedy Space Center. Most probably would have selected KSC so you could see the launches, et cetera. However, the chief counsel's name at NASA Langley was Kathy Kirk. So as a Star Trek fan, I could not work for a Kirk at NASA. And I went on to work for Kathy. She's since now retired, but absolutely wonderful. It was a terrific experience. And it showed me that even going to law, there were still many ways to be able to integrate space into my practice and into my life. Coming out of law school, I worked for a Virginia-based firm called McGuire Woods. It was McGuire Woods Battle and Booth back then. I think just McGuire Woods now. And here I was working on a wacky idea about launching payload to the International Space Station from Wallops. I was trying to form a coalition to support orbital launches from Wallops Island. I was only 20 years too late, or too early at the time. Good idea, a few decades ahead of time, but really appreciate the support I got early from people like Eric Anderson from Space Adventures, who were interested, the local authorities in Virginia and Maryland, both, who eventually brought that concept to fruition. And I even helped support a company called Rotary Rockets, which I would describe as the commercial space 1.0, when we had some engineers with really interesting ideas, but not a lot of funding. And since I was doing work with Wallops, the state of Montana, where again I'm from, was working on Venture Star. I don't know if you and many of your listeners are probably too young to remember Venture Star. It was a single stage to orbit system that was going to replace the space shuttle. And my home state of Montana had not just one, but 5 different locations where Venture Star could land, 2 of which got in a fist fight on the steps of the Capitol in Helena, Montana. So the state, I just cold called the Department of Commerce and offered my support to help advise relative to commercial space. And they were very kind. This was Governor Mark Roscoe, and his name was Peter Blauka, who was Secretary of Commerce at the time. Just some wonderful people, visionaries, and brought me in to help establish the Montana Aerospace Development Authority. And we tried to obviously resolve and coordinate sorts of issues, but the writing was on the wall. The Venture Star probably wouldn't be moving forward. And I recommended to the state that they should look at companies that are in development to try and get them to locate. And that's when I cold called a company called Bigelow Aerospace to see if we could get them to come locate to Montana. And it turns out Robert Bigelow, the founder, had a ranch up near Missoula in the Kalispell area and had a great love for Montana, and never quite got done getting to the state, unfortunately, but I got to meet him. And then in a few years, I spun out and opened up a DC office for Bigelow Aerospace. And that's when I began handling not just legal issues, but also policy. I had left for Montana on a leave of absence from my law firm, came back. This was in the early 2000s when there were a lot of different buyouts going on. And my whole group had moved to a different law firm. So I decided to try and get a job at Patton Boggs because I really enjoyed the policy aspect of law firms. And Patton Boggs at the time was the #1 lobbying shop, policy shop in DC, and had a great opportunity to work for them. And then Bigelow was kind enough to come on as a client, and a few years later opened up a DC office for Bigelow Aerospace. And that's where I began supporting the Genesis missions, where we were taking a Russian ICBM, removing the warhead, putting on a commercial fairing, and using it for commercial space launch, literally swords and plowshares. And we were launching from an active Russian nuclear missile base in Siberia, which is why I never complain about the hot weather in DC after several years of Siberia running launch campaigns. And here I got a lot of experience, as you might imagine, in export control. I drove my work in export control reform. And from there, we ended up collaborating with NASA to put the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module onto the International Space Station. I was honored to be a part of a group achievement award that NASA gave myself and the other members of the team for the beam, and then getting that first inflatable habitat attached to the International Space Station. Very grateful to Bigelow Aerospace and Robert Bigelow for those opportunities. And then after that, I ended up leaving to join what was then Space Systems Loral, SSL, now Maxar, to handle congressional affairs, federal relations for them, and again opened up the DC office. And I was very grateful. I was brought in by Al Tadros, our current chief technology officer here at Redwire. So it's wonderful to be able to continue to work with some of the friends that I had while at Maxar. And SSL, as you know, went through several iterations. I'd been in a couple of different positions, ultimately serving as vice president for civil space for what was then Maxar. And by then, my old friend Jim Bridenstine had become NASA administrator, and I was making too much money and I was too happy at Maxar, and Jim had to come and ruin it all by saying you had to come to NASA. And I really appreciate Jim Bridenstine's insistence and his continued support, because I said no to joining NASA on numerous instances, and he never gave up on me, and I'll be forever grateful for that. And obviously coming to NASA was the opportunity of a lifetime to work with fantastic people like Jim, like both Jims, Jim Bridenstine and Jim Morehart, Gabe Sherman, Matt Ryden, just a terrific group of people. Scott Pace, who wasn't at NASA, but obviously was incredibly important. And it was really an opportunity to just live my dream of the Artemis Accords and creating this singular international collaborative framework, both to support the Artemis program and to create norms behavior to ensure a peaceful and prosperous future in space, achieving that Star Trek vision. And we did great work in getting the Artemis Accords going. This administration has done terrific work in continuing that vision and expanding it. We're now at 43 countries, which is really incredible, and I hope for many more in the future. I'm actually here in Dubai in United Arab Emirates, which was a founding member of the Accords. Extraordinarily grateful for their support for the inclusive vision that UAE brought to the Accords. And now we're seeing the Artemis program not only go from one administration to another, but hopefully a third very soon. And that continuity, that sustainability is so important. It's partially why the Accords exist, and something that Jim Bridenstine and our whole team was very focused on, not just building a program, but building a program that could survive, that can sustain. Because when it comes to beyond low Earth orbit human spaceflight, unfortunately, at NASA, failure hasn't just been an option, it's been a certainty. And that's why we built Artemis to last. We knew we had to overcome that. And part of the solution was bipartisanship. And Jim Bridenstine, as a former member of Congress, did a great job for that. Senator Nelson has continued that. I know there were arguments that politicians should not lead NASA. I would argue that having a politician in either the top or the second spot is an absolute necessity for NASA, that it's extraordinarily important to have that capability. And then the second part was building an international program. If you look at the success of the ISS, part of the reason for that sustainability is because of the first word, international. So we needed the Artemis program to be international, hence the Accords. And again, it was a privilege of a lifetime to be able to support that. And I'm very grateful to both administrations on a bipartisan basis for the continuity that will take America and the world back to the moon.
Speaking of which, That kind of gives me a nice segue into the next question I want to ask you, because it's, in your view, how does Redwire contribute to the broader goals of space exploration, like exploration of the moon and Mars?
There are very few aspects of space exploration that Redwire isn't contributing to.
That's very true.
You mentioned the diversity. You named the mission and the activity, and Redwire has usually touched it in some way, even if it's relatively small. For example, with our sun sensors, our star trackers, again, there are a few activities that occur without Redwire, which, again, is great strength of the company. Relative to the moon and going on to Mars, Redwire certainly has some incredibly important roles to play. And let me begin by going back with power. We are power constrained on the moon. That is going to be one of the most difficult and critical issues. And Redwire right now is working with NASA on a program called LVSAT with Astroscale. It's the Lunar Vertical Solar Array technology. And this goes back to our ROSAs, that not only do they roll out, but they retract. And on the moon, one of the greatest enemies is regolith, is dirt. And when you get an array coated with regolith, it's obviously problematic. But if you roll it back, roll it out, you can shake off that dirt. So not only do we have a great system in terms of packaging, again, the ROSAs roll up and then roll out for get a lot more energy, but you actually have a terrific way to mitigate that regolith issue. And then you've got our 3D printing. So as I mentioned, Redwire is the only entity to successfully 3D print on the ISS. And that kind of 3D printing is nice to have on the ISS, but is going to be absolutely vital. Will save lives as we move forward to the moon and Mars. Because ultimately, it's always going to be better to print your components, print your parts, rather than having to bring them all with you, which takes up a huge amount of mass and volume and cost and time. The president of our In-Space Industries Group, John Bellinger, says, make it, don't take it. And that is one of the ways that Redwire will make significant contributions to going to the moon. We're very grateful to NASA and the Space Technology Mission Directorate to have a terrific program called Mason, where we're using technologies such as microwave radiation to sinter regolith to build berms that can help protect against plumes from rockets taking off, that can create platforms we can sinter the regolith to allow for landings, safe, secure landings of not only CLIPS, but eventually even space flight missions. So being able to live off land, to leverage the regolith to build structures, landing pads, habitats, roads is going to be extremely important. And Redwire is leading the way in these two very important areas. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention our camera capability as well. All of the imagery that you've seen from the Artemis 1 flight was from Redwire. So those beautiful photos of the moon, the Earth, the Orion spacecraft. When I was at NASA, it was my pleasure with Jim to bring back the NASA worm. As children of the 80s, that was something that was very important to us. And brought a tear to my eye seeing that worm logo on the Orion spacecraft. And thank you to Lockheed Martin as well for the support and the opportunity on those cameras. So that's yet another way that Redwire will contribute, literally taking the whole world to the moon via the incredible imagery that our cameras will provide.
You know, you talked about going to the moon, and I was 10, and it's summer camp when Neil and Buzz first walked on the moon, and I got to stay up late and watch it on the little black and white TV in the camp director's quarters. So it was that was kind of my entree into the whole thing, was watching that whole thing unfold. So
well, I hope you'll stay up late again. I hope you'll stay up late again, watching it on a much better television this time.
Absolutely, I will. Just a couple of more questions for you, Mike, and they kind of deal with a qualified workforce for the new space economy. Is there a qualified workforce out there to meet the needs, and what advice would you give a young person who's considering a career in space?
It's a great question about workforce. We have a wonderful qualified workforce, but not nearly enough. if you look at the number of engineers, of STEM professionals that are going to be required for Artemis, for our national security activities, we don't have the people. And that's why it's so important that we support STEM as an aerospace company, as a field, as an industry, that the government get involved. Nothing inspires like NASA does. I mentioned the Hunch program that my mother worked for. It's so important that we engage all of America in aerospace. We talked about diversity of products at Redwire. This is where diversity of people is so important. It's not just the right thing to do, it's vital for national security, that we need to make sure women, minorities, rural communities, city, inner city communities, that everyone participates, particularly as we look at the challenge that we have from China. And believe me, they have the numbers. We need all hands on deck in America to participate in the space program, not only to explore the stars, but to ensure that we can defend our diversity, defend our freedom here on Earth. So that is a critical issue that we need to focus on as a country.
One thing more, and that's, we ask this of all of our guests, and that is to look out over the next 10 to 15 years in the realm of space commerce and think about Redwire's role in that, and tell me what you see.
I see Redwire providing the foundation, the skeleton for the future, that our power systems, our cameras, our buses, our satellites, and our manufacturing will enable this incredible future that NASA, the private sector, our international partners are building. We're doing it now, but our systems are the foundation that enable, that allow our companies, our visionaries, our dreamers to build this incredible future that we're all going to be able to participate in. And if I can go back to the other question you asked about any advice to a young person coming up, because of the incredible enabling capabilities of Redwire, because of the diversity, not only of our company, but all of commercial space, there are opportunities for young people that simply didn't exist for you, for myself.
Sure.
When I was looking at my career in space and space law, it was really NASA and a handful of big primes. Now, you can't even keep track of the number, the diversity of different space applications, different space companies, different ideas. And as someone who does not have a strong technical background, I had enough trouble adding up my hours as an attorney, there is still a place for you to contribute, that I would say, regardless of your skill. If you're an HR person, if you're an artist, if you're communications, if you're a lawyer, if you're an accountant, there is a place for you in the space industry. So if you have a passion for space, if you have a desire to be a part of this incredible journey, don't give up on that dream. Come be a part of it and help us achieve wonders at Redwire and in the commercial space industry generally.
Mike, we are out of time, but I really appreciate you taking the time out from your busy schedule there in Dubai to talk with us a little bit today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the discussion, and live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. Mike Gold is Chief Growth Officer at Redwire. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Ex Terra Podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and many other popular podcasting platforms. Be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any of our podcasts or any of our other videos. You can get daily updates on space commerce by subscribing to the Journal of Space Commerce on Substack at www.xterrajsc.com. And one thing more, be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn and follow us on X at XTerraJSC. Until next time, I'm Tom Patton. Thanks for joining us.
I wanna go faster, faster. Hands in the air, we're gonna crash. Searching for the answers. My Galileo through his looking glass. Thirst for reason. Our dreamer's eyes we gaze into. A sense of purpose, know my view. Like finding water on the